What's
What's
happening?
up? It is Wednesday night, 12 Volt Talk, episode 123. We are super excited about our guest tonight. Not that we're not super excited about every guest we have, but this one like hits into my soul because the old school stuff we're going to talk about tonight is like what kind of formed my early passions, I guess, in the car audio. And I just can't wait. So we're not going to waste a whole lot of time getting straight to our guest. Rob, you pumped about this? You ready to go?
Oh yeah, man. Hey, you're a Rockford guy. I've always been Orion Phoenix Gold, so
Hey, I can
you're a
be
known Rockford
Orion,
guy.
I can be Rockford Fosgate, and I can be Phoenix Gold, and I don't care what people say. I like them all.
Yeah.
But so tonight we have Mr. Larry Frederick, and I'm gonna bring you in, Larry. He is here with us with Cicada Audio is the new company that he's with. How are you doing tonight, Larry?
Good.
Thank
Trying
you
anyway.
so much for being here. I know you do a lot of in-person trainings, and a lot of people probably have, have the privilege of talking with you and hearing your sessions. I do appreciate you taking the time tonight to talk with us because we have a lot to ask you, and hopefully you have a lot of good stories
And
to tell
maybe I
us.
have answers. Maybe.
Oh, it's
We'll see.
exciting. So we're gonna dive right in because we have so much to go over, and time, we're never gonna be able to get through everything. We're gonna do our best. But I know that you've been around car audio for a while. So before we get into the PG, can you tell us how did you get into car audio? What was your kind of entry into the industry? And tell us, about how that started and the company you were with and all that.
Well, I started in audio in '72, and I sold home hi-fi at Atlantic Music in Costa Mesa, or we used to call it Land of Music, but it was Atlantic Music, and we sold home audio. So I sold SAE and Crown and Macintosh and Marantz and JBL and Sherwin Vega and all that good stuff. So we had a lot, and Altec Lansing, and it was all home audio. At that time, there was no car audio, none. Now in '73-ish, something four, there was a TC20 Sony underdash cassette deck. Now before that, in the '60s, I had a '69 Chevy van. It was all white, and I put Mickey Thompsons on the back, so it was Dagoed, and it looked like a Hot Wheels drag truck, right? Like if you get a Hot Wheels drag truck, my van looked exactly like that. And I had bingo balls in it and orange curtains, and I cut the dash out and fiberglassed it and welded steel in it and put a pop in. I made my own pop in and pop out 8-track, but it was a 4-track first, but it didn't last long. But I had an 8-track, and I had 12-inch Utah triaxes in the back in '69. Okay, so a couple of days ago. So I honestly say I don't think anybody beat me on putting 12-inch speakers in a car. Nobody, but I did. But then I went and sold hi-fi in the '70s, and there was really no car audio at the time. So it all had to be, if you wanted it, you had to bogus it together. There wasn't anything. But then they had the TC20 and started getting into more stuff. And I had a cassette deck in my Ford pickup truck. So I was working at Atlantic Music, and I decided to put 6x9s in my door, but I couldn't be normal. So I had to do edge on, edge off dampening in the door. So I damped the door with indoor outdoor carpeting, and then I went and got felt and fiberglass and mixed densities in the door to create a terminated transmission line in my door. I was really into this stuff back in the day. I was a geek, a holy shit geek. You know what I mean? I mean, we'd have nights we'd go listen to phono preamps. You know what I'm saying? And cartridges, like Cartridge of the Month Club and all. You know what I mean? So I did this in my door, and then a job came up. I got hurt. I was skateboarding and tore my shoulder up, did an AC separation, and I couldn't work for a while. And my first wife worked at a dentist's office, and Rich Coe came in, and there were a patient there. And Rich worked for Audio Mobile. And he says, hey, I'm looking for somebody to help me out. So my wife is like, hey, my husband loves to do audio. So I went interviewed with Paul Starry and Rich, and they're like, well, what do you have anything to do with car audio? Why would you even think you could do this? And I said, well, let me show you my truck so you can kind of see what I do. So they came out, and I said, and I opened the door and I took it apart and showed them how I have all this different layers of material and damped the door and did all this stuff. And they're like, you're hired. So I go, I don't know nothing, but I know enough to be really dangerous, and I learned really fast. So we got into Audio Mobile, and that was in '76. And so we made the very first small bridge amp and a preamp called SP300. And then Rich started, because ADS came out with 200, which was this big amp with these two little box speakers with the 200s.
They look like little bookshelf speakers, right? Yeah.
And they made it so you could put it in your car, which was really weird. Like this amp was gigantic, man. It was like this tall and this deep, like bigger than a shoebox. You know what I mean? And it was 100 watts a channel, but it wasn't full range. It was like 100 hertz up, because that little speaker couldn't handle bass. So they knew, and they were real engineers, and they figured out that, hey, you can't go low. So then Rich said, well, we need to make a full range amp of this. So he dove into figuring out how you could develop a high power car amp. Well, the problem is you have to do switching, because you get 12 volts. So if you don't do something to boost the voltage up, you can't get higher power. So he had to figure out how he had to reverse engineer what they were doing. Well, at the time, there were no FETs that would do it. So we used bipolars. Well, bipolars aren't really very good for switching. They're too slow. So, but he made it work. I mean, he did the 1500, I think it was called. And he made the very first real full range, high power car amp. And then there was Lanzar at the Laser, and then Rockford. But Rockford wasn't very power. It was a very low power amplifier. And then I went on from there. I went to work for Altec Lansing for a while and did the Voice of the Highway. So I did all that stuff. And then I did, after I left Altec, I interviewed for Yamaha to do their car audio, which they did for like 2 years and then bailed out of it because it really screwed up. I told them to hire Rich and and we'd take it and run with it. And they're like, nah, we'll go with this other guy. I'm like, okay. I go, you really screwed the pooch on this, guys, because we could have made this thing happen. And they're like, whatever. Well, it lasted 2 years and they gave up. So then I went to work for Alpine, because Rich worked at Alpine. So they needed a trainer, and they said, oh, let's get Larry in there. So I came in, and I only worked at Alpine 9 months, and I had a bunch of headhunters come after me and say, hey, you should do this. And I went to work for Coustic. And that's when they weren't doing anything. They were doing copies of like linear power amps, and they did really bad copies. You know what I mean? I'll go, guys, you're copying it, and you're copying their mistakes. I get copying, but why are you copying their mistakes? That makes, they have a jumper here because they were too lazy to change the board. Well, why didn't you change the board instead of doing the jumper? You know what I mean? Back in that day, because it was all made in Taiwan. And I would go to Taiwan, and my first project was working on Hertz HZ acoustic speakers. And they said, we've been working on these speakers for six months, and we just can't get them to sound good. I went, okay. So we went to Taiwan, and we went to the speaker factories. And I said, well, let's go see all these speaker factories and see what's going on. So we went all over Taipei, talking to all the speaker companies. We'd go in and start talking to them, and I go, okay. So I'd pick a woofer up and go, what's the teal smalls on this woofer? And they'd go, what are teal smalls? I'm like, what do you mean, what are teal smalls? And they go, so I couldn't believe it. So we went to like 9 different speaker factories to find one that actually knew what teal small was. And they were a real factory. You know them today as Audiofrog. Okay. That's Mayloon. They're a real speaker factory. So I went in there. It was Rock Koo was the engineer, a little bitty guy. And he was awesome. And man, those guys could build anything. I came back with David and Ed and went, these guys are the man. They know. I mean, they would pulp their own cones. Like we were listening to my Hertz speaker HZ versus like Kenwood and Pioneer, because at the time those were the two big speakers, and ours sounded horrible. I mean, it was like we had an A/B tester and we listened to it, and I'm like, what is the deal? So we went and unhooked all the drivers and only played one driver at a time, like the mid bass, and ran frequency response curves, and then hooked up the tweeter, and then ran the tweeter by itself and ran frequency response curves, and then overlapped them. We got a light table. It's called a window. You know what I mean? And we looked at the curves and said, ooh, why is this happening? So then they went, Rock goes, I know how to fix that. Tomorrow I fix. Let's go eat dinner. Okay, great. And drink. Oh, okay, rice wine. Have you ever had Mao Tai?
No.
Have you ever had Mao Tai? Mao Tai, it comes in looks like a white Lancer bottle. It's kerosene. They just call it wine. It's
moonshine. It's moonshine.
Mao Tai. Oh my God, it's unbelievable. Anyway, so we went out that night and we came back semi alive the next day. And they bring out this speaker and they hook it up and it sounds 10 times better. I'm like, how did you do that? Oh, he says, we changed it from a flat cone to a curvilinear cone. And it made all the difference in the upper mid range. So he took me down. They had 20-ton presses and they could make the cones overnight. Like they would tool new tools and press cones. I'm like, wow, you guys rock. Holy crap. That's when I figured out I can do any damn thing I want. You just got to tell them what to do. So I'm like, ooh, let's go. So let's go. That's when I developed XM3s, XM5s, you know what I mean? 360, 380, 190, 560, my first skateboard.
Oh yeah. So we're talking mid to late 80s. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, like mid 80s. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So because I did that just because Rockford had their big amp, and I'm like, really? Okay, you want to play? Let's play. Let me build my big amp. So that's why I built a 560. It was just to mess around because I could. So then I got tired of working for a company, working for companies and I made pretty good money, but I was like, I'm pretty good at this. I mean, I need to be an owner of a company. So Keith Peterson owned Phoenix Gold, and Phoenix Gold started because Keith he did work for companies in the United States that wanted audio equipment like parts and things. And somebody, I don't know the name of the company, they wanted a bunch of interconnects like RCAs and F connectors and all kinds of stuff. So he got together, got all this stuff planned out, built it all, had it on a boat in Taiwan, shipping over to America. And when they shipped it, the company called him and said, we were just kidding. We really don't want that anymore. Can you sell it for us? And he's like, sure. How about 50 cents on the dollar? I'm like, okay. So he bought it all. So he bought the whole container of cables. So now he's got all these cables. He's like, what the hell am I going to do with it? So he calls me and says, hey, what am I going to do with all these cables? I'm like, I don't know. What the hell are you going to do? He says, well, I'll sell them to my buddies on the East Coast, because he was living in Marblehead, Massachusetts, outside of Boston. Okay. So then he said, hey, you designed a cable when we were at Proton, because he and I worked together at Proton. And he said, you designed this triple shielded cable, and nobody makes that cable. Can I make that cable? I said, sure, make that cable. So can you show me how to build it? Sure, I'll show you how to build it. So I did drawings for him, showed him how to build it. They built it. And I got a design and engineering award for it. I'm like, really? You guys are easy, but okay. So I got a design and engineering award for triple shielded, which makes a huge difference. Unfortunately, it only makes a huge difference in RF and video. It really doesn't do shit for audio. We thought it did, but the reality is, because of the eddy fields in a car, the radiated noise, the twisted pair was much better for that. Okay. So anyway, we developed the triple shielded, and then he goes, well, I'm gonna change the name. 3 a.m. in the morning, he calls me. He goes, I'm gonna call the company Phoenix Gold. I go, you're in Marblehead, Massachusetts. where the hell are you coming up with Phoenix Gold? He goes, well, Phoenix rising from the ashes and gold ends. I'm like, whoa, dude, did you have some really bad Mexican food last night? I mean, like, what?
He
He
had
goes,
a
awesome.
vision.
It's a great name. And I'm like, oh my God, sure, whatever. So then he created Phoenix Gold, started selling cables. He was literally mowing his lawn with a cordless phone, selling cables, literally, right? So then it got to be doing pretty good business. And so then I thought, he's got money. I'm going to go talk to him. Let's start an amp company. In his inside of Phoenix Gold, we'll build amps. I kind of know how to do that. Let's build amps. So I
Now,
came up.
Larry, I don't want to interrupt you, but I will just here for a second, and I apologize for it. But when I saw the early Phoenix Gold before the amps came out, to me it always looked like a premium product, like a premium interconnect, a premium
Yeah,
speaker cable. So
yes,
to me, even the roots of the company, it kind of set it to a level where, hey, if you're going to buy this, you're getting the best. So I
yes,
just
they were
wanted
the best.
people that are listening to understand that's kind of that was the vision of the company from the market perspective.
Yeah, yeah. They
And sorry, I
always,
didn't mean to interrupt you. So you can go
yeah.
ahead.
He always wanted to build the best, and he wanted the best cables. That's why he did the triple shielded, and we did all kinds of cool cables. But I'm not a cable guy. I really could care less. You know what I mean? But I'm an amp guy. I'm a speaker guy. I'm like, let's build. I go, all these assholes are always saying they build the best. And if you open them up and look inside, you're like, not so much. I go, you know what? I want to build the best. I want it when somebody opens my amp up, they go, holy crap, who are these guys? Who built that? I mean, I'll jump ahead a little bit. We'd go to a trade show and there would be engineers walking around, not audio engineers, like NASA. They would walk by and they'd come in the booth and they'd look at our stuff because in the show we would have them like that, where they'd be open with the plastic bottom on them, right? And they would look at it and go, "What is this for? Is this like for space? I mean, are you shooting this shit into space?" I'm like, "No, this is car audio." And they're like, no. And I go, yeah, that's a car audio amp. They're like, really? That's a car audio amp? I go, yeah. And he was like, holy crap, you guys are serious. I'm like, yes, we are very serious. And I told Keith from the very beginning, I go, we're going to build the best, period. The fastest. So I was living in LA at the time, and I had my Lincoln, my 88 Lincoln Mark 7 with the Mustang GT motor in it. It hauled ass. And so I needed to put a system in. I said, but you know what? I need to go crazy because these guys are all nuts. That was in the era of the uh, 44 from Rockford, right? The 45.
The
Remember the
45, yeah.
Punch 45? And everybody was doing all this, like, 8 speakers on the amp and all this stuff. And I said, you know what? Our amplifier has to be able to drive whatever I hook up to it. So I designed a system with double sixes, 5, 4 tweeter in the door, double threes in the dash, 5 and tweeter in the rear pillars, and 8 compound loaded isobaric 6-border enclosure in my car. Okay. To drive off an MS-250.
Did
And I
you use
go,
the XVR crossovers, or was this
we
way before then?
way before then. So
Right.
I had to build all these passive crossovers. So there was 20 inductors and 20 caps hooked up to this amplifier, right? And so we built the first mock-up, and the first mock-up came from Larry Schatz, who designed the Schatz detector circuit. He was the FM guy. He designed and built. He designed the most expensive FM tuner of all time, the Cicada. If you ever want to look at a holy crap, super expensive tuner, it's called Cicada. At the time in the middle 80s, it was $7,000 for an FM tuner
Wow.
in the middle 80s. You know how much money that is?
That's a car.
Anyway, yeah, yeah. So I designed the heatsink. He built the amp, but we based it on a Coustic 380 was the basis of it. So we built that up, and I had this system built in Tucson by John Mongelli, Classic Car Sounds, who was the best installer on the West Coast, period. I mean, I drove 5 hours to get an install because there was nobody in LA I would trust. if that tells you something. So I drove all the way out there and stayed there 5 days, staying in a $19 a night hotel, which was pretty interesting all by itself because we had no money, you know what I'm saying? And built the system up. I drove from there up to Portland because at this time, Keith had moved from Marblehead to Portland because his dad was super famous in Portland. His name was, my mind stopped. Peterson, obviously. Oh my God. Anyway, Peterson's Furniture Store. It was a huge furniture store. He did $12 million out of one location
Wow.
in the late 80s. You know what I'm saying?
Wow.
So I talked to him about doing this amp project, and his dad was there because he was going to fund this whole thing. And I said, we're going to build the amp, and I did a business proposal and all the stuff we were building in this amp and all this stuff. And he looks at Keith and goes, "You think this is a good idea?" And Keith goes, "Yeah." I said, "Look, you can sell dollar things or $500 things. What do you want to sell?" "I want to sell $500 things. We can get way farther ahead doing that kind of stuff." So, okay. So we started the company, built that amp, that first amp. I drove from Tucson up to Portland. I got to Santa Barbara and the amp died. So we got back and went, "This ain't going to work, guys." So we hired Jeff Payton. And Jeff Payton worked for a company called Biamp that was a pro audio company. He is a serious audio engineer. So he looked at the circuit and he did a what's called safe operating area chart on the transistors. And he goes, "These are way out of their safe operating area. We need transistors like this that does that." So we had to change over to those big sank-in parts you see in the photo in there, the really big parts, whereas everybody else ran those little bitty TO220s. We did 247s, right?
Yeah.
And the reason for that was, and those are on the other side, goof, the green ones. See the green and the black? Yes. If you look at those, they're really big part. They're sometimes called TO3Ps or plastic parts, but those are 25 meg holy crap parts. And the transistors in the other amp, the TO220s, those are 35 cents. The transistors in the Phoenix Gold are $3. So the way it works in the real world is whatever the bill of materials times 5 equals retail. So when marketing comes to engineering and says, "Hey, we need to build this 50 watt per channel amp with crossovers and everything for $200 retail. Can you do that?" And engineering goes, "Okay." And they go in the back and they come back out and go, "Here it is. It's $250. And marketing goes, "Wait, whoa. Hey, we said 250. What part of 200 to 250 did you not get?" And they'd look at you and go, "Okay, what do you like removed? Because we have to take shit out if you want to drop it." You get what I'm saying? So the problem
I
is
always get it.
it's all cost of parts. It all comes down to what do you want to do? I mean, if you look at the terminals, like, give me a break. Look at the board. Come on. Now the board.
You mentioned earlier, Larry, that you didn't intend for them to be shown off, and that's the part I'm curious about, because the gold-plated circuit board and all the layout makes it look like you did kind of intend to do that.
Well, what happened was that the people that were making our boards was a company called Rogue River. They're down in Medford, Oregon. And they do like serious medical equipment and really high-end, high-tech stuff, right? So when they did our first boards, they didn't have any normal boards. They had gold boards. And they said, "Hey, is this okay?" And we're like, "Sure, okay." So we got them in and we stuffed the boards and we're like, "Holy crap, these look fantastic." And I went, "Keith, Phoenix gold boards, Phoenix gold. We probably had to keep them gold. What do you think?" And he's like, "Yeah, but it's way more expensive." I go, "Oh, well, bummer. It's just going to be whatever it's going to be." And that's why at that time, so you see a 50 watt per channel amp that's $500 retail in the early 90s and 90s. Right. It's a really expensive amplifier. You know what I mean? We sold the piss out of those amps. I couldn't, and we went to the reps back then, and I did this. I did this, and it was Phoenix Gold member, but it was also there was a charter, and the charter was, and I would talk to the reps and say, here's the deal, guys. You can only, we had 16 rep firms, like, which is normally the United States. And when we had this meeting, we said, and I, I pump them all up about how cool the amp is and what we're building. We had one amp, one. We had nothing else. And I said, but you know me, we're going to be a whole lot of other stuff. Oh, okay. So I showed them the amp, and everybody, oh, it's great. And I go, okay, so now here's the deal. You can put on one dealer per territory. And they're like, why would we be a rep and put on one dealer? And I go, because I can't build more. So why would we put on more dealers than we can build? As we ramp up production, we'll put on more dealers. So I'll call you and bless you and say, now you can put on 2 dealers. And then I'll call you and bless you. Now you can put on 3 dealers. Like I said, the deal is, it's not that we're trying to be hard asses, but the real deal was I couldn't ship enough product. So why piss everybody off when you can't ship? That's dumb. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's how that all happened. So then, we did the MS 250, and I changed it to 275 because Rockford got in and went, "Whoa, look at what it tests. They lied." I'm like, this is coming from Rockford. That's pretty funny, guys. If you remember that era,
I do remember. They well underrated. Yes.
Yeah. So I'm like, pretty funny, guys. So okay, I'll raise it to 275, right? Ooh, it's 2 times 75. So then we did the 2125, and then I said, look, Orion's making these. We need to do some high current amp, because all of a sudden IASCA came into play. So IASCA started to become a big kind of deal. And if you think about it, IASCA was kind of the early social media. You know what I mean? There wasn't really the internet. There wasn't, but IASCA events were the social media. That's how you got people to see your product, know what it was, know that's cool. Hey, now you just put shit on YouTube. I mean, you know how to do that. And all of a sudden it's like, woo! I mean, listen, for me with my new company, I've been shipping speakers for 3 weeks. It's out of control. I mean, and it's because one guy did a review. Really? You know what I mean? And I'm telling everybody to, like, whoa, slow down, slow down, slow down. The problem is I can only get so much product. I placed $500,000 in orders 6 months ago. I'm still waiting for product. You know what I mean? And it was done. It's not like they were still working on it. It was done. I'm still waiting for product.
They're still probably sitting off the shore without people there to unload them. Yeah.
2 containers right now, 2 containers. So, but at that time we didn't have that problem because we built everything in Portland. We had a small building off of Highway 95, I think, 85, right off of 85. And we had a small building there, and we outgrew that really fast. And so the people that owned that building on the backside, on it, like a half a block away, owned a whole bunch of buildings. So we started taking over building by building by building by building. At one point, we had 7 buildings, and we had a little go-kart. We called it the screw cart, and it had a big screw on the side of it, and we'd drive around, and it had all the hardware inside, and we'd move it around and everything. I mean, it was crazy. I mean, we had to move, but in the beginning, we had the MS250, and I knew we were going to do a 2125. So we went to CES, and I built these displays that the amps were mounted onto, and then had plexiglass over the top. And the reason there was plexiglass over the top was because they were wood. Because I couldn't get the heat sink fast enough. Kaiser down in LA couldn't push the aluminum fast enough. So I had to make them out of wood, but the metal end plates were real, and the RCAs were real, but there was nothing inside. I might have had one prototype amp, that's, the gold one, but there was nothing because I didn't have anything. So I'm the king of fake it till you make it. Oh man, I can fake it till you make it. So we built those. And then at the same time, I built the MPH 6300. And the MPH 6300 was designed and drawn on a little bitty drafting table this big before computers. If you guys can remember that far back, I don't think so. But before computers, I had a little drafting table to draw this amp up on it. And so it's all based on the MS275 heatsink, just bigger, right? Well, the problem was as soon as I started figuring out how big the cores were and how big the transformers and the caps and everything else. It kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger and longer and longer and longer. And it's like, oh my God. So when I finally drew it up for real, I'm like, this thing is 52 inches long. And I'm like, who cares? It's a statement piece. We'll build 10 of them and that's it, right? We'll build 10. We'll just build it just for fun and show it at the show. And it's going to be $12,000. Okay. So Keith bought into it. I said, Keith, it's going to be $12,000. It's going to cost us $12,000 just to build it, the first one. Okay. He bought into it, right? So we're getting it made. We're trying to get the extrusion. Nobody can push an extrusion that big. Nobody. There's no place known. I mean, maybe now there's one or two that can do really big stuff for ships and stuff like the sails that are aluminum, right? Because of how wide it is. So to get it done quickly, we went and had it cast at a monument place. You know, the guys that do the giant horse monuments and Robert E. Lee and all that stuff.
Yeah.
We had it done there and they cast it. Well, the problem was when they cast it, it's called outgassing, and it outgassed. So it had all these bubbles and stuff, and they had to do it like 3 times to get one sort of okay. And then we had to take it and mill it because it was so messy. And now, so we have this giant 52-inch heat sink. We're running out of time. CES is screaming up on us, and we got to have a booth, and I've got to get this thing done. And it's like, and Ben Heil did the boards, right? And it's a 4-layer board. So it's power on one side, ground on the outside, right? And then there's 2 layers of audio inside, right? 2 layers hot and ground audio, and 2 layers on the outside hot and ground. So it's a 4-layer board, which are typically now all the full range class 2 or 4-layer. You have to do that to knock down RFI and all kinds of other issues. So we did a 4-layer board. At the time, nobody did 4-layer board. That was unheard of. That's like doing computer boards, right? So we had it done. Again, it was done at Rogue River. The problem was they couldn't get the 2 inside layers done quick enough. So I had to have it for the show. So we did the 2 outside layers. So even though that's a real board, not really, because there's 2 layers missing. So it will never work ever. Now it was supposed to. I mean, if you see the gold circles on top, the little rings, those are heat sinks I milled out on a lathe. I'm kind of handy. So I milled those out on a lathe and we had them gold plated, right? And then if you look at the Litz winding on the cord, that red looks like octopus. That's 22 strands of wire twisted. Nobody does that. You will never see stuff like that. And remember, this is 1989, 1990. So then you see those white Teflon standoffs? I had to mill those. I had to make, because they're Teflon, because they had to be non-electric. They couldn't conduct electricity. And then it's hard to see there, but there's there's 2 bus bars that run across that. So you have the standoff and then 2 bus bars that run through it. There's a positive rail and a negative rail. So we could tap off of it. Because this thing does 300 watts at channel 1 ohm or 600 watts half ohm.
Wow, and it's a 6-channel also, right?
6-channel.
6-channel. And I think the other part that we kind of skipped around a little bit about was the cost. So I remember seeing this one in the magazines, and like the first year I saw it, it was like, I don't know, $14,995. I'm like, $15,000, and then the next year it was like $45,000.
No, it was 112,000. Yeah.
That was the last year that it was posted, but the earlier years it was less.
Well, we tried to make it so nobody tried to buy it. I didn't want to build it because the problem is that just the heat sink is $5,000. Just the heat sink. Okay. Remember the 5 up number? So the heat sink cost retail is $25,000. We're not talking about anything inside. Nothing. Just that. You get what I'm saying? Like all of a sudden this got way out of control. You know what I mean? Talk about overrides. I feel like I'm the US government, like You need a $5,000 toilet seat. I'm your guy. You know, so that turned out to be a holy crap. And then the crossover inside. Show the picture where it shows the crossover outside. And that crossover, not that one.
Yeah, I'm going back. I was looking for the
There it
ads
is.
that showed the price of the amp. That's why I'm sorry. I was paying attention but skipping around.
That crossover is wood. Now with a steel plate over the top. That's that's wood. And those knobs are glued on from the back. So that
Nice.
we never even did the PC board for that. That never happened. So that would never, I don't care what anybody did. There's no making this work. I mean, it is possible. You'd have to take the whole thing completely apart, duplicate the board, figure out the 2 layers inside, and do a 4-layer board. That's a couple $100,000 project, guys.
Yeah.
So what? And now, if you look at the power terminal on the end,
yeah,
that's solid brass milled for 2/0 gauge wire.
Whoa.
And
now, was it designed for was original tension for this crossover to kind of sit on the top? Is that was designed
no,
for?
you don't. What you don't see is when you flip that heatsink over, that crossover locks down into it.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay. Oh, and locks down into it. What it was, there was a umbilical cord, a DIN cable would plug into it, and you would go inside the car and plug it in, and you could dial it in from your front seat.
Okay, gotcha.
It was a 9-band parametric. It was 9-band parametric. It was 3-way electron crossover, 6 dB, 12, 18, or 24. I mean, it was a really serious, holy shit amplifier. Now, remember the power terminals, the covers that went on them because of how much current would flow through them. I had them made by the same people that made the cones for the X-Max woofers, the carbon. They make the windshields for Blackbirds. You know, the Blackbird plane.
Yeah.
And the windshield is that thick. All right. That's the material. That's the scrap off of Blackbird. And they had to be milled, each one. So that was $2,500 for the power terminals. So it really got out of hand really fast. So when we came back from the show, everybody's pumped up. I had an order from Singapore for 10 of these. I'm like, no, we're not building it. No, not happening. And they're like, why? We'll order 10 of them. I go, I don't care if you order 50 of them. No, it's because the engineering time. And we had to spend another year to develop all the shit to make it work. Because nobody had a detachable electronic crossover that went into the front of the car. We didn't know what kind of issues we'd have with transmission or noise or any of that stuff. So we'd have to go through all that stuff to figure it out. It was going to be a lot of work. Or we could develop AX204s and, you know what I mean, and 208s and 408s and EQ2 232s and 215Xs and all that stuff. And 0-point speakers and all the stuff we did. So I made an executive decision that said, we're just not going to do that. We just don't have time. I only have 2 engineers, 2 audio engineers, electrical. We don't have time for it.
Do you have an idea on how many of those heat sinks got out like that?
There's only one.
There's only one.
There was a second one, but it was really rough and just got melted down. So there's only one of those amps. There isn't multiple laying around. I mean, there was only those 3 boards were built and that amp, and there's no more laying around. So
who ended up with the block of wood EQ? So that's got to be something.
It should have come with it. I don't know if it ever came with it.
Yeah, somebody needs to comment because I'm hoping the person who has it or who has that is looking. So this is a 1991 car stereo review directory. And this is what they have listed in the middle. You see the MPH 6300. They list it here for 23.5, but if I pull up the consecutive years after, you can see that jump that you were talking about. And I think the final year was over 100. It was 119 or 120 some thousand.
Yep. I didn't want anybody to buy It was just,
Keep going up.
please don't buy this, please. You know what I mean? And if you look at everybody else's, you look at the dollar amount, it was like our amps were really more expensive than anybody else's.
It definitely stood out, and they of course they highlighted the MS250 that you talked about here, and I've talked about this before on this show, but seeing that amp in the car audio and electronics, I believe it was late 1989 when they had it in the new product section in the very beginning, and had it flipped over, you could see the internals. I was automatically in love. I'm like, that's the amp that I want, gotta have it. So your explanation of being so difficult to get to the dealers and all that, I was directly impacted. Unfortunately, I didn't know you at the time, and I couldn't call you up and say, hey, I want one of these, but I really wanted one of those, and I could not find one for years, literally until I pretty much gave up with car audio for a little bit. But that amp, I always wanted one. So when I got back in a few years ago to car audio, kind of got back interested in it about 10 or 12 years ago, I made note to find some of these, and I have found some, but still the impressive nature of them is timeless. I mean, you can flip that over and, like you said, show it to anybody, and they're just impressed. And I know you have an art background, right? So I would assume that you wanted it to look a certain way, so it not only the performance was there, but also, in my opinion, when you look at something and it looks really nice, then it all of a sudden sounds better, right? Because
if you look inside the amp, the way amps are laid out is there's half the amp is the power supply and half the amp's the audio. Okay, so you really want to separate them because the power supply radiates noise like an atomic bomb. So remember in the day where it used to blank out FM and AM and all that good stuff, we had that issue too, but in a different way. Only in Europe did we have that issue. We didn't have that issue in the United States because we knew what the problem was, so we fixed it, right? But Europe would call me up and go, hey, Larry, I've got an amp here. I've got an MQ430 4-channel amp, and I've put it in a Mercedes, and it wipes out the AM radio and FM. I'm like, what? And so I'm back in our where we're building the amps, and every amp goes through and gets tested. I'd take the amp, and I'd set it on top of I put the FM radio, because we had a Pioneer radio up there, and the amp would be on the bench, and we'd take the radio and I put a piece of cardboard and I'd set it on top of the amp, and I'm listening to FM. I'm going on the phone to Europe going, I don't know what you're talking about, because I have an FM radio sitting on top of the amp and there's no noise. He goes, I'm telling you. Well, the good news was I was flying out to Amsterdam like the next week or two. So I said, well, I want to see this when I get there. So I got there, and they had it all set up, and they had a Becker radio there, and they said, watch, and they turn on the amp, and they have the antenna, and they move it around a little bit, and wow, it was wiping out everything. And I'm like, why is this happening? So I looked at the radio and went, oh, they're on 50 kilohertz centers, we're on 100 kilohertz centers. So the pulse out of the power supply would be getting into that radio. So RF is a huge problem. So I know all about noise problems. If I can't get it out, you are in a world of hurt. Because, man, I've been there, done that, filmed the movie, printed the T-shirt, sold the book. I'm telling you, there's only certain ways that things can happen. You know what I mean? It wasn't the girl in the yellow polka dot bikini walking by that caused the noise. It was something in the car. And, right? Or if it's a Harley Davidson that rolls up next to you, and you didn't have any FM noise at all, but that Harley rolls up, and all of a sudden you got tick, 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 tick through your radio. It's easy to fix. You roll the window down, take your Desert Eagle 50 caliber, shoot the bike stops, the noise goes away. We're good. You got to stop the radiation. You know what I mean? So yeah, it was, all through that history of Phoenix Gold, I got to do it whatever I felt like. You know what I mean? I designed anything I felt like, whatever whim, whatever. I mean, we did a center channel module for a while. I worked on the first third octave EQ we showed it at CES in '94. There was a programmable computerized EQ that you guys never saw. Okay, but it was there, and it was in a room I built, and it was awesome. The problem was everybody saw it and went, and it was really expensive. It was like $800 or something. And everybody looked at it and went, and you don't see it. It wasn't a bunch of sliders, you know what I mean? It was all
Yeah.
computerized. So you had to have a computer. It was just a box, right? So everybody goes, I don't see. It's kind of like DSP now. You know,
Right.
it's the magic that goes on in the back that you don't see. Ignore the guy behind the curtain. It's just this cool stuff we're doing. You know what I mean? And so I wanted to build it and it was going to be a cool product, but it was like, nobody's they don't get it. They just don't understand.
It was too
Everybody goes,
early.
"Oh, we're smart. We know what we're doing." I go, guys, I shipped you ZPA amplifiers. I shipped 10 out pre-production of the ZPAs. Do you know what those are, guys?
Yeah, 0 points.
And I shipped those out to guys to test, right? I got like 8 of them back, right? And they said, "Oh, they're dead out of the box." I'm like, "What?" And I go, "So you didn't call me to ask me why it doesn't work?" Well, what happens is, remember, there's a top plate of plastic that comes off to get to all the adjustments and it goes back on. Well, I know that car audio guys in general are maybe not the sharpest pencils in the box. You know what I'm saying? So I put a micro switch on one of the corners. So if that top was off, the amp would not power up because guys would be powering up the amp and stripping wires. You know what I mean? Oh, look. We had amps come back with wires welded inside. I'm like, really, guys? You're stripping wires over the amp board. Probably not a good idea. So, you know what I mean? So when people say, "Larry, you talk to us like you think we're stupid," I go, "I don't think it. I know it. There's no thinking involved." You know what I mean? So I go, so people do the crazy. So you have to go out of your way because you have to assume the dumbed down factor. You know what I mean? Which is, in the early days, I had a master slave switch on those amps, right? And people would go, "What's this for?" Well, they thought that, like the sub amp would be the master and the tweeter amp would be the slave. No, no, no. The tweeter amp is the master, the sub amp, and the way that was hooked up to the power supplies, so that the power supply would sync together. Instead of doing this, it would do that, and so you wouldn't have what's called heterodyne. Because the more power supplies you have in a car, more switching supplies, the more the weird Martian sounds going on. That's heterodyne. That's a bunch of power supplies beating against each other. So, like I said, been there, done that. Trust me, if I can't figure it out, you are in a world.
I'm glad you brought that up because I forgot to even put that into my list of questions. But I always did wonder about what the master slave was on
Yeah,
those
so it was really
MS.
cool. So
Yeah.
you could tie them together and sync them, right? Well, the problem was it would sync the sub amp to tweeter amp, and the sub amp has major pulses versus the tweeter amp.
I got you.
So what would happen? It was you put it out of sync, and you'd blow the power supply out. So I took that out. I went,
Okay.
yeah, you guys don't get
No,
it.
no more switches for us. We
Hey, it
just
was
have
easy.
covers that with micro
It
switches.
was like you went downstairs into the silk screen area and went, remove this. Okay, it's fixed. It's just like fuses. You know what I mean? Like on our amplifiers will weld. You know what I mean? And people will go like,
Yes.
right? So is David Stevens here? Because if he
He is. He probably he mentioned he would be somewhere in the chat. So yep, there he is.
So the issue was that I was at a dealer. I was at City Radio down in Florida, and it's Chris Cataldo and Paul Piro and Rob. I can't remember Rob's last name. He owned Select Products, and they were all working there. They were schlubs, you know what I mean? And they had this sound room, a big sound room. It was bigger than my office, so it's like 12 by 14, something like that. And they had, the wraparound speakers. You had speakers here and speakers there and speakers in the ceiling. They had speakers everywhere. It was like 64 speakers in there. And I'm like, you sell all these speakers? That's a lot of speakers, man. So, and they had the old Audio Authority switcher, right? And the old Audio Authority switcher had a whole bunch of, like a row of buttons you pushed, right? And so, but if you push 2 at a time, they would all light up. They would all work, or 3 or 4. So Chris had a hook on the wall with this piece of wood stuck on it that said Phoenix Gold, right? And I'm like, what's with the Phoenix Gold stick? He goes, oh, check this out. He pulls it down, fires up the stereo, and there's 28 switches, and he goes, boop, and he fires all the speakers up in the room on this amp, parallel, right? And goes, watch, and cranks it up, and dust is falling out of the ceiling, and he goes, isn't that cool? And I'm like, that's really stupid, but it's cool. You know what I mean? So he goes, Larry, how is this possible? Because that's like negative ohms. How can I have 28 speakers parallel? That's not possible. I go, Chris, have you ever looked at the wiring on the back of Audio Authority? It's like dental floss. There's a whole bunch of dental floss connected, right? So if you figure out the impedance of all this wire hanging out there, it's never low because there's way too much impedance going on. So what you think is happening and what's happening ain't the same thing. It's very impressive. And for those who don't understand what's going on, they'll be like, wow, you can drive negative ohms. Yeah, this amp will drive negative ohms damn straight. We can sell that shit.
That's a good demo, so they can try it in their car.
Then I was at a dealer I told you about Virginia, and the guy had a nail stuck in the wall, right? And I'm like, what's with the nail? And he goes, well, your ad says it'll drive nails, so I show that. I'm like, really? And it was that big a nail too. And he had a wire coming off the amplifier parallel to the wiring that went into the switcher, and he had it paralleled off, and he would sit there and turn the lights off in the room and sit there and arc, sparks all over the place. And he goes, I sell more of this shit because of that than anything else. And he says, what I do is I take a business card, I get a business card, I take a business card and I put some wire on it that's stripped and taped on and hand it to him and say, go to Bob's down the street and hook up the wire on his amp. Tell me, I just did this at my shop. Go down there and I want to hook it up to whatever you got. And they'll go, no way. And I'm like, right. So then we made up the arc welder. So I made up the arc welder Phoenix Gold Tester. Now, how I have one of these, I have no idea, but I have one. But we made these as a POP that we send out to dealers just for fun. I mean, back in those days, we had so much fun doing crazy shit, man. It was just wild.
Yeah, you guys had more fun on ads than anybody. Next to maybe what was the one that had the chick with the recurring series? I can't think of their.
Oh, MA.
Yeah, MA Audio.
MA Audio had what's
and we
what's
didn't
her
use
name?
anything for chicks in our ads.
They spent all their money on her instead of their product.
Yeah.
Did I
Excuse
say
me.
that? Sorry. Shouldn't go there. Larry, so there's another question I want to come back to related to what you talked about being in-house, but when you mentioned, the excuse me, the MPH 6300 and then how it got to the point of, there's no way we're going to finish this, it's going to be too expensive, but then you still mentioned, hey, I was able to do what I wanted to do, and you guys did special editions. So I'm curious to understand about like the Frank Ampenstein, the Son of Frank, the special editions you came out with, and the story behind those.
93 or 94, a guy in Manassas, some dealer, I can't remember the dealer. He was a big Phoenix Gold dealer. He had a guy that said, hey, can you take a 2125 and marry a 430 to it and make it one? And I'm like, if we do it butt to butt, we can, because the terminals roll on one side. So we could flip it because we cut all the heatsink in-house. We mill everything in-house. It's all made in-house. So we could make anything we felt like doing. You know what I mean? One guy had 6 275s and one heatsink. Okay, we could do that. I mean, it's crazy, but sure, if you want it, we could charge you for it. So we had the guy ordered this. He says, can you build this? I said, sure, we'll build it. What color do you want? And it was some weird color. I'm like, sure, whatever weird color you want, we'll do it, because we powder coated in-house. We had an oven so big you could put a car inside. Not a very big car, but you could put a car inside. You could put what could you put into it? A Mini Cooper. But you could put a car inside. So this amp was floating around downstairs when it was being built. The problem was when it was floating around downstairs, because it was being custom made, it was the first one. nobody knew what it was. And then they had to say, hey, where's that amplifier with the 2125 and the 430 and blah, 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 blah. And it got to be so complicated. Somebody took a felt pen and on the inside of the heatsink wrote Frank. This is Frank, Frankenstein, right? Frank. So I came down and they were working on Frank and they had it apart. And I looked at the heatsink and I said, who wrote Frank? And they're like, he did. I didn't do anything. I said, no, it's not a big deal. I just, who wrote it? And he goes, well, Bob did. I'm like, Bob, you're the man. I said, I'm going to call this Frank Ampenstein. And they're like, okay. I said, no. I bet you we can do a limit. And we had these 4-channel amplifiers. At this time, we couldn't give 4-channel amps away. Now, right now, 4-channel amps outsell 2-channel 10-1. Okay, but at that time, we couldn't get rid of them. So we had 100 of these 4-channel amps sitting around doing nothing. And I went, we're going to build a limited run of Frank Ampensteins, make 100 of them, because there will only be 100 because we don't have, and we're not building the 430 anymore. So we'll build 100 of them and we'll call it Frank, and we'll charge crazy money for it. And we're going to make it look like one of my favorite movies, Lou and Abbott Costello Meet the Mummy, or Meet the Frankenstein. And it was a movie where Frank was in this giant crate that they shipped in from Transylvania. And when they opened the crate up, it was all full of hay and stuff in a burlap bag. And he comes walking out, right? And we're going to do that. And we're going to do the gold bolts. So it's the wooden crate with hay, with a burlap bag with the bolts. And I said, we can do anything we want. We're Phoenix Gold. What the hell? Let's just do it for fun. I'm pretty sure I can sell 100 of these. Well, as if anybody's an aficionado of this stuff, they know that they sold like crazy. And remember, at the time, there's no social media, none. And we sold out of these like instantaneously at $2,500 a piece. And Keith is like, hey, man, that's some good money. Let's keep doing that. I'm like, okay, well, we don't have any 430s. Let's put a 275 in there. We'll call it Son of Frank. Okay. So we built the Son of Frank. And then we said, well, we killed that. What else can we do? And I go, well, we have the M series. Let's do
Outlaw.
Let's do Bandit. Okay. You know what I mean? And we just kept going. It was like, literally, we could do whatever we felt like. We did the Reactor near the end, right, when I was there. Because I was there 1990 to 2000, and then I quit. That's another long story. But we built the Reactor, and I was at a dealer in Georgia who had bought a Reactor, and this is in the middle 2000s. I was at the dealer, and he had a Reactor there, right? Well, they sold the Reactor, but they still had the case, and the case was a travel case, an amp case, bright yellow, with nuclear symbols on it, right? Well, what they did was they said, we need to get rid of this thing. So once a month at their shop, there's out on the center, they could put big trash out, and they put this yellow case out with nuclear symbols on it. You know what I'm saying? And I was there when they did it, right? And fire trucks show up, and police, and everybody, woo! They came in and goes, they had guys in hazmat suits and, bomb squads and all kinds of stuff. And I'm like, what's going on here? They go, we put the case outside and we didn't know it was going to be that big a deal. I'm like, you've got like 4 fire trucks out here and 8 police cars. What are you going to say when they come in? Well, we don't know where that came from. I never saw it before. Right. Yeah, so
me and Derek had to pick one of those up recently and just carried it out. It's like, you cannot take this on a plane. No.
Yeah, well, we even talked about not carrying it into the hotel because we were afraid that they were going to see it and be like, what do you got there?
Well, I used to, at my seminars in the 90s, I had a grenade, right? I had a real grenade, and somebody took the grenade and hollowed it out and filled it with lead, but it was a real grenade. So when you pulled the pin, it would go, fwing, you know what I mean? Right?
Yeah.
And in a meeting, I would be there, and the guys would be talking and getting in the way, and I'd just go, wing, and I'd chuck it into the middle of the hall where they were, right? So it would go, thud, 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 because it was really heavy, and it got really quiet, really fast, and they went, wow! So like for a billionth of a second, they went, did Larry really throw a grenade? I'm like, really, guys? You know what I mean? So, but I used to carry, I'd get a box, just a cardboard box, and fill it up. And I'd carry a Nerf gun. So during a seminar, we'd be talking, and somebody would say something really stupid, and I'd bring the Nerf gun out and I'd shoot them. I go, really, really, you're really that? Tell me you're not that stupid, please. Tell me you're not that stupid. Come on.
Turns out we are. Turns out
Yeah, we are. So we admit it.
That's why I made bullshit cards.
There you go.
There you go.
Everybody
And
needs
I
one.
print thousands of these. So if anybody goes to my email and sends me an email where they are, you might get some bullshit cards because I print a lot of them.
Larry, you need to do what who was it? Wayne Harris, when he was on here. He gave away some stuff, but he told people send a self-addressed stamped envelope and I'll send it to you. And I'm like, how many people still know what that is? Probably not many, but there's several people that did it. So we'll get the information if you guys want one of those cards. We can
so that's how the special editions happened. It just came out of nowhere. It was accidental, but it was fun. Actually, we had a lot of fun doing that. It was always a gas. You go to shows with it, and everybody was, this is the greatest thing. It was actually easy and it was fun.
So where did the MS-1000 fit into all that?
That was right at the end when I left. That was right at 2000. That was a 2250, which a 2250 was a 2125 on steroids. Okay, so what I mean by that is, you and I talked earlier. Remember I said when you design an amplifier, the engineer has to make a decision. What impedance are you really hooking it into? Because then you build it for that impedance. Okay, so what happened is that a 2250 is just a bigger cores, those red cores over near the 10 where it says 10 years. Those cores are higher mu mel, they're higher magnetic material. They used to be ampersand 750s, but they had to be a little bit bigger, higher magnetic energy. Okay, because you need to throw more voltage and current through it, right? To make more power is a voltage thing, period. So just swing more volts, you swing more power. The problem will always be is it's class AB amp. It's 50% efficient no matter what. We can all talk about that on a bench, it'll test higher. Yeah. But if you put it in a car playing music, make sure that you're dialing into 50%, because then you're okay. If you sit there, 1,000-watt amp, class AB draws 166 amps, period. If it's really 1,000 watts and it's really class AB, it's 166. If it's a full range class D, it's 116 amps within 5%. And I don't care who builds it. If you bench it, you will see it every single time. It is nothing mystical, nothing magical. It is what it is. So if something draws less current, there's only one reason, because it's less power. There's no other reason. It can't be more power and draw less current. Hang on.
Oh
no. Nice try.
So you're telling me the amp that's rated 5,000 watt with the 30 amp fuse is not going to do 5,000 watts?
No. Well, and then plus the problem is fuses don't do what people think they do. That was one of the first things I trained in my classes. I go, so
this is a great topic for those who are curious, because I've meant to go over this before because people ask all the time, Derek, how does that amp pull 60 amps of current and it's a 30 amp fuse? Tell us about it, Larry.
So the problem with fuses is, and this happened in the early 90s, we had circuit breakers. Remember the Phoenix Gold circuit breakers? And I had 50 amp, 100 amp, 200 amp circuit breakers. And so we shipped them out all over the place. The guy in Florida had 100 amp in his Jeep. And he calls me up and says, hey, I've got this 100 amp circuit breaker and it's not popping. And I'm like, uh-huh. And what are you doing? He says, well, I've got it hooked up directly with my battery, and I'm taking needle nose pliers and I'm dead shorting it to the body of the car, and it won't pop the circuit breaker. And I'm like, holy crap. Whoa. Well, let me get back to you. So I'll go in and I go to Keith and I go, Keith, what's the time constant on these circuit breakers? And he goes, time who? Time Warner? What? And I go, no, time. What's the time constant? He goes, I don't know. I just sell them. I'm like, what do you mean? You don't know? And he goes, no. And I'm like, who makes them? So I go to the guy that makes them, the company that makes them. I call them and they go, oh, circuit breakers aren't rated like fuses. They're 400%. 5 seconds.
Oh, wow.
I'm like, excuse me? He says, yeah, 400%. So that 100 amp circuit breaker takes 400 amps. So I called the customer back and said, sir, what gauge wire are you using? 6 gauge. I almost asked him, did you get 6 gauge? What? I've never even
Go back
seen
to
6 gauge. You have 6 gauge wire? What kind of, anyway, so you have 6 gauge wire. And I go, and you have needle nose pliers. I go, have you ever measured the impedance of these pliers? Because if you measure the impedance, you're going to find these are really high because they have that joint, right? And it's got like a grease in it. So it's a dielectric. And if you measure it, it's probably an ohm or two. Well, guess what? You put an ohm or two, yeah, it will never blow because you can't pay. And plus, what's the battery you've got in there? It's a Group 31. Group 31 max is 140 amps at amp hour, max.
Yeah.
Well, if you have a 100 amp circuit breaker, it takes 400 amps to blow that. You will never blow it, ever, never. It's just there to make you feel better.
And that's 5
So,
seconds constant. And what you have to remember with music, your current is going up
dynamic.
and down constantly. So
So
yes,
what
it's-
happens is the time constant is 0.2 for 350% and 10 minutes at 20 minutes at 110%. So if you pull the current, because I was at another store in somewhere in East Jesus, and good old boy had shit stacked to the ceiling and fuses all over the wall. They had 100 amp ANLs and 200 amp ANLs and 300 amp, and I'm looking at these going, ooh. And some guy was on a hoopty in the back, blasting a stereo, came in and said, "Hey man, I blew my fuse, man. You got a bigger fuse than this?" And he had a 100 amp ANL. So the guy went to the back counter, grabbed the 150 and said, "Yes." And I'm like, oh, this is a bad idea, guys, because it says Bob's stereo today, but when that car burns to the ground, it's now going to be, Boris's or Luigi's. It's going to be somebody else's because you just got sued because you sold them this. Not a smart idea. So the problem with fuses is if I have a 1,000 watts amplifier and I know it draws 116 amps, so what size fuse should I use, guys?
for constant, I just use 100 amp fuse.
50 to 80 amp.
Correct. 50. Because here's the deal. Depending on the voltage drops, now the voltage drop could cause all kinds of new headaches. So having CCA wire is the kiss of death. So if you have real wire and you're doing it all properly and you have enough battery, then we're not too big of an issue. You probably will never blow the fuse. But then if you look at amplifiers that have fuses on the amps, what's the fuse on the amp protecting?
Your car.
Right. It will
Yeah.
never protect the amplifier, ever. Remember, I had that piece of wood pushing in 64 speakers, cranking it, and it didn't blow a fuse? What do you need to do to blow a fuse? I got 64 damn speakers hooked up blasting, and I can't blow a fuse, and they're all parallel. Something's wrong with this picture. You know what
I can
mean?
do it with the resistive load, but we won't get there.
Exactly. I can do. I can make I have 2 car batteries on my bench. I can make it kneel to the ground, man. I mean, it just goes whoa. You can see the voltage go whoa, and I'm like, holy shit! I have 2 big car batteries. I can't even test full power at 1,500 watts because it drops down to 10 volts. I'm like, damn. Now if you use lithium, that's a little different.
Yes.
I have
Now-
a little lithium now, and it makes a huge.
It's a total game changer, lithium. But I'm going to be shot if I don't ask you the question, which I know we talked about this last night when we did our test. But the Cyclone subwoofer.
Cyclone.
Tell us about that.
That was developed by a company called Servosonic. They made that weird double 15 with belts. Have you ever seen that thing? It was a double 15. It was used at the Mirage. If you go to the Mirage, they have that volcano, and when the volcano erupts, it has all this bass. That's those woofers doing that. And they
Now
built
I think you're referring to the Vortex, though, right? That's the Vortex.
Yes.
Okay.
So that technology then became a new version that Tom Danley designed, is the Cyclone. So the Cyclone, you got to think of a Cyclone as it's an AC motor. It's actually a DC motor. So take a DC motor, but a big one, right? And you put a shaft in the center of it, right? A tube, like a 2-inch aluminum tube, let's say. And you have this shaft inside of a motor. And then you put these blades on it, like axe blades, like Thor's hammer, right? So you have this thing that looks like an axe with a motor on the bottom. Well, if I put DC in it, it spins. But if I put AC, it does that, right? So now the problem is, if it's open air, it's out of phase, so nothing happens. But if you put a tube over it and you block the back wave from the front wave, then if you open a hole up in the top like a cyclone, it makes bass. Now, it's a really inductive load. I mean, big time inductive. Do you have a back of it? No. There you go. So that's a motor. That's a big ass motor in there. And when we designed it, the way what Tom didn't work. What his design, Dominic Bone and Country took the original one, and he figured out, because he probably tried 10 or 15 different materials for the blades. Like he tried fiberglass, Kevlar, and foam, and all kinds of ways to figure out. And what we found was the thing had a 2-inch X-Max. You know what I mean? Like serious. So it could really move some air. But what we didn't realize was that at 400 watts RMS, you were at X-Max. There was no more. So that's why you would get broken blades, because at the bottom of that scoop, that slide, the blade would hit that, right? So what I wanted Keith to do was take it and not sell it in the car, but we would build a home subwoofer with a dedicated amplifier and a servo on it, like a piezo, so that it would not let it hit that edge. You know what I mean?
Right, and be matched. Yeah.
It would blow the blade off. So it made tons of bass, but those things cost us I think they cost us like $280 to build.
Wow.
To build. Remember I told you the 5-up cost? So let's call it 300. That means it was $1,500. We didn't sell them for $1,500. We sell them for $450. It was a complete waste of time. It was cool technology. It's a really cool technology, but a really good 12 done right in a vented box gets pretty close. You know what I mean? And costs a lot less, right? And that box needs to be pretty big. It needs to be like 2 to 3 cubic feet for a 12. So it's pretty big. So it was it was a fun project. It took us a year to do that, but man, and $1 million. Thank you.
Wow. Well, if you never try, then you never know how it's going to end up, right?
That's why you've never seen that technology used ever since then. I mean, that was done in 97, 98. Have you seen anything like a Cyclone ever again? Nope. Mm-mm. That's because it's not cost effective. It just, the return on investment is too high. For what? To sell to who? No. So, and that was the servo sub. We were, at that time, who did servo subs at the time?
Velodyne did some.
Velodyne actually sold a servo subs for car for a short period of time, like for a year or two. And actually they were pretty good. The problem was the same issue we still continue to have today, is that people hook up an 8 or a 10 inch and think it's an 18 with 5,000 watts. I mean, the problem is expectations. You know what I mean? When you sell a woofer system to a kid or somebody, you need to really figure out, you really need to qualify, like, what are you really expecting out of this? Because, I mean, you put a 10 in a car with a 200 watt amp, it's only going to play so loud. So if you want more than that, that's why God made little bitty amps and giant. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's a reason for that. Because if you really want to go big, it really gets expensive. And expensive from the product and expensive from current. Because current's not free. And I try to teach in my seminars that using a more efficient woofer in a vented enclosure, look at that thing move. Wow.
I've never seen one in real life.
I've never seen this video, and I was trying to find the other sub we were talking about, this is amazing.
I want one. I don't want to do that, and I want to put it on a slow, on like a 10 hertz slow. Just have a button where you hit it and it goes. and have everybody go, "What the hell is that? That's a woofer." No, you show that to anybody, and they're going to go, "What the hell is that?"
Yeah,
This is in Europe, by the way.
Yeah, that's really, really
You can
cool.
tell.
that's cool.
Yeah, isn't that? It was a cool thing, but man, it was. And see how everybody mounts the amps upside down? They were never designed to be that way. Heat sinks don't work upside down. Hello.
The heat will not come off. The heat
I will
likes
say,
to.
you guys have to shoulder the blame for that because you shouldn't have made the guts look that cool if you didn't
Oh,
want
right.
to.
Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry. What an asshole I am.
Technically, it's your guys' fault.
Jeez, right.
See, the
Oh,
funny part
yeah.
about this is people are seeing this today with some of the newer amps. They're starting to do that again, you know, putting the plexi on the bottom. I'm like, guys, they did this a long time ago, but it still shows you that there's some visual appeal to an amplifier, even though, you know, a lot of people will stash it away somewhere where you can't see it in a car. The fact that you have something that looks like that and that you can show off like this, you know, that just, to me, it makes more of a statement, you know,
Yeah,
about how the amp is.
That power amp. But here's the thing, it isn't, because what Noe figured out was, and we didn't even know, was how inductive it was. Man, when it got down below 50 hertz, the inductance was unbelievable. So, you know, have you ever heard that this amplifier can drive highly reactive loads, highly reactive inductive loads? If you've ever heard that saying. So if you want to see how an amp handles highly reactive inductive loads, hook it up to a Cyclone. You'll find that not too many amps like it. They don't like that because it's really inductive. You know what I mean? It'll make amps run so hot you can't touch them. They could run normal speakers, no problem. You hook it up to a Cyclone and it gets so hot, you're like, why is it getting so hot? Because it's running an inductor. That's why.
Yeah, we think maybe I saw a comment in the chat, but we think maybe one of the engineers might have left and gone to Dyson, and they use this for their vacuum cleaner because it does look a lot like a Dyson.
Well, I think they copied us because I think we built it long before Dyson.
I know, that's what I meant. They took your technology and put it into the vacuum.
Yeah,
well, look, we've this is a great chat. I do want to give some time though to talk about your newest venture that you're working on now, and we, you know, if we have maybe a future episode, we can bring you back and talk some more Phoenix Gold or some of the things that we might have missed in the stories. But all the stories tonight have been awesome. You've done a great service to you know, the history and going over some of the things I was always curious about, and I'm sure a lot of people who are listening are as well. But tell us about Cicada Audio and what you guys are and what you're doing.
Well, Cicada, I started it because I wanted to build a really high-end motorcycle amp speaker line. I figured there really was a need for that because all of a sudden when I'm at Diamond, man, we were selling so much of micro amps and stuff. I'm like, man, we need to do a whole division just to do motorcycle. And you know, the problem with most companies is, and retailers too, is they don't focus. You know what I mean? Focus is a problem, and people just don't focus. And I said, I'm going to focus, real narrow focus. I'm going to build motorcycle audio. Period. We're not building any 100-pound woofers. We're not doing any of that stuff. None of that. No marine, no backup cameras, no nothing. It's going to be strictly for motorcycles. So the deal on motorcycles is how loud they are and how, when you're running down the road, you need to be way over them. So you need to use real high sensitivity speakers like these. So you need to use like real high sensitivity drivers, because otherwise it gets all washed out because of the road noise, right? So I wanted to build something that's higher power because, you know, motorcycle guys are really nice guys and they listen to Claire Marlowe and, you know, yeah.
Yeah, Metallica and ACDC.
Yeah, all the and orchestra music and
Yeah, I hear that all the time when I, you know, those guys ride by.
So they're a bunch of animals, and they're going to blow up everything if you let them, right? So where everybody else does like a 6.5 with a 1.5 inch voice call, I do 2-inch. My horn, instead of a 1-inch, is 1.4 inch. And the reason for the bigger voice calls is simple: power handling. No matter what anybody says, it all comes down to voice call size. Period. Bigger voice coil, more copper, higher temperature. Right, Derek? Period. I don't care who builds it. It all comes down to that. So if you want to make it so it lives, you want to make it so that it has bigger voice calls, not smaller. But if I go bigger, then physics kicks in. You have to put more magnetic energy. You can't do heavy cones. And everybody's like, well, why didn't you do Kevlar? Or why didn't you do carbon fiber? Because the problem is there's a really smart company I work for called Electromedia, and they do these speakers called Hertz, and they have speakers that are like $5,000 and $6,000 per speaker, and they could build them out of any material known to man: Kevlar, balsa wood, fiberglass, whatever. And you know what? They always fell back onto even for the most expensive speakers, paper. And the reason is A, it sounds better, and B, because it's lighter and it's higher sensitivity. So if you want to play it loud on a bike, that's my diaphragm. On my diaphragm, the whole diaphragm comes off. So normally for everybody else, you get this. You get this. Whoa. You get this tweeter diaphragm with this leads on it that you get to cut and solder and figure it out. Yeah. Yeah. No. On mine, you just replace the whole back because somebody will blow it. I mean, I guarantee it. But I do everything possible to solve the problem. My crossovers are 12 dB per octave. They're in injection molded cases. I make them so that they can take the abuse. They're vented. I put a polycell on them so that if you drive them too hard, they shut off. You know what I mean? Because people are crazy. I made it so it's all plug and play. Everything for Cicada is going to be plug and play. So I'm still waiting on my harnesses. They're coming hopefully the first week of October. But the whole idea was to have an amplifier, which is our DSP 125, which has the DSP built in. So now you can control the horn. You can run, I make 4 ohm and 2 ohm. So now I can get the most power out of a small package. So because these guys are going, well, they put 8,000 watts on a Harley. And I'm going, guys, okay, I have a calculator. Okay, not nuclear physics. 8,000 watts times 2 divided by DC times 0.7. Okay, it's going to draw 933 amps if you put 8,000 watts on a bike. So you're hooked up to Hoover Dam? Cool.
Maybe that's the ones that have the 350s, with the full size alternator and maybe.
Yeah, no, because they have stators, and the biggest they get is 55. So the problem is if you don't put a bunch of batteries, you're going to have problems. So, and I'm going to build some big amps, but I'm also going to be the guy that says, if you're going to do this, you got to do this. If you want to put big power, you need to put extra batteries on the bike. You have to, because the stator is not going to be able to keep up with the power. There's no way. But if you put 3 lithiums on a bike, it's pretty good. But without that, no. And that's why if anybody's having problems with amplifiers blowing up, well, it's caused because of not enough current. Now, it's not that the amp is bad. It's not
right.
bad. The problem is the engineers designed it for a perfect world. Well, motorcycle ain't perfect, that's for sure. You know what I mean? So I'm trying to build stuff that's as bulletproof as I can possibly make it, because I know people are going to be crazy. So I'm like, let me teach you the laws of physics. Okay, I have tutorials on my webpage. Go to the tutorials. It says I want my bike to play louder. Go read that. I have a thing on how to set gain. It's 18 pages on how to set gain. Oh, 18 pages, really? But if you've just for fun, it's a great bathroom reading material. You should download it. And in the beginning, I say, for all those lazy guys, go to page 12 and it shows you how to do it. Okay, but if you really want to know, there's all this other information so you can understand where that is all coming from. You know what I mean? And I've got some videos on how to do the DSP setup and a bunch of stuff. I'm trying to make it as easy as possible, but still, you still got to be. My rule is always you have to be smarter than the gear.
Right.
Do not touch it. If you don't know what a DSP is, step away. Just step away.
Well, all the years you have in the industry, and I think it goes without saying that you can tell just by looking at the speaker that it's well built. So I think it's a very interesting market. Go ahead, Rob.
I had a question. Like, how do they do like bass on? I know nothing about motorcycle audio. How
The
are they
problem,
it's probably not good bass, but how are they filling it in?
well, you can. I mean, think about it. If I give you 2.1 cubic feet, can you make bass with 2.1 cubic feet
Oh yeah.
on
Yeah, for
building a
sure.
box?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. No problem. Now, is it SPL crazy dual 18s? No, but it can be some pretty serious bass. But the problem is it can be bass standing still. But as soon as you start moving, there ain't no bass. Because the road noise, just for fun, take your RTA, because I know you guys have bunches of them. But take your RTA, because if you have an Apple, which this isn't, by the way, but if you have an Apple, you can get audio tools. Yeah. But you can get
We love you, man.
you can get audio tools or you can get audio control. Download that app, and for $5, you get a real RTA. It's very. I have 5 RTAs, and I use the Apple one the most. The only reason I have an iTouch is for that. Period.
Yeah.
Because
I use
man,
that
it
app
is
quite often
awesome.
myself.
Yeah, and so just for fun, when you're in the car tomorrow, Larry said, let's look at the RTA. Don't even turn the stereo on. Look at the RTA. Go set it to -3 or -6 on slow, right, on the app, and then
Decay, yeah.
sit there and look at the curve standing still, right, and then save it, and then start driving and look at the screen without the stereo being on, and save it again, and you'll be like, whoa, there's a lot of bass, and then the stereo ain't on. How's that happening? Because the road noise. And think about a bike with no box around it. Wow. So the problem is you need to use a woofer, not a subwoofer. You need it to go down to like 45, 50. You don't need it to go really low. And they feed it into the side, like they'll take the bag and they'll put the woofer on the inside aiming into the tire. And then they'll put 2 of them like this. Well, the problem is when you have 2 of them aiming at each other, that dimension becomes a null. So
Right.
now it's real high, so it's not that bad, but then you have pressure. So if one cone's pressuring the other one, it's going to keep it from making bass. You know what I mean? So, I mean, people do it all the time, but then if you put a speaker in the lid and then a woofer in the bag, then
Right.
that speaker becomes a passive radiator, even though you didn't want it to be. It is now, because that woofer is going to tell that little speaker, even if it's a 10, if you have a 6x9, the 10 is going to move way more air than that 6x9. So it's going to force 6x9 to move, even if it doesn't want to move. You know what I mean? So there's basic audio still happening that people aren't thinking about what's going down. You know what I mean? It's like, you
So,
guys
so
need,
you could be the first company to build an isobaric loading, have them
well,
facing reverse polarity in one.
yeah, the problem is that you mentioned there's no seal between them. You have open
Yeah,
air.
that's
So I already thought about all that stuff. I have some other ideas to do some cool stuff. But yeah, I wish I could defeat the laws of physics. I'd be a billionaire.
Yeah.
Trust me. But there's no way to defeat the laws of physics. I'd like to. No.
So I've noticed on the site you have dealers as well, as it looks like you sell the products directly on your website as well.
I sell direct. I haven't sold anything direct because I really want the dealers to do it. But you know, somebody's going to be in East Jesus, and nobody within 500 miles, or they just want to buy from me because I'm such a special guy. But they just want to buy from me, and I'll sell to you. But I have distributors and I have direct dealers, and I'm really trying to keep it on the load. Now I'm trying to, because the problem is it can amp up so fast, and I don't have enough product to feed people, and I don't want to. I've been down that road. I know how that all plays out. So I'm telling people, slow down,
Right.
because I mean, they're like, well, I can sell 500 of these, and I go, I don't have 500 of them, and if I did, I wouldn't give you 500 because I need to sell everybody in the country. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm not
Spread
going to
the
load.
love.
Nobody's going to get loaded because that's a bad idea. I want the product. I'm doing this for fun. I'm really old, man. I'm doing this for fun. I just want it to be fun. And when it isn't fun, I'm not going to do it anymore. But as long as I'm having fun, let's just keep doing it. And I enjoy it. And I like teaching people. I mean, I can talk for 6 hours straight, no problem. Not even taking a pee break. You know what I mean? I can't. I have enough shit in my brain that I'm leaking. You know what I mean? And I can bring it up at any moment, and you'll be like, where did he come up with that? I mean,
So going back,
he doesn't even have paper in front of him. He's talking about stuff.
it's
Let's talk
awesome.
about game bandwidth product. Come on, let's talk. Let's go.
So I've got this goes back to the Phoenix Gold days, and you saying everything was in house. Like you could design it, you could CAD it, you could you could have it built there on site, you could do everything there.
Napkin doodling. I could draw it on a napkin.
Right.
Literally.
So
and Yasu in tech area with engineers, he would CAD it up, send it downstairs, Ethernet, to our laser, cut it out on a sheet metal, and it was 4 foot by 8 foot. So we could cut big things. He could cut it on a laser, send it over to bend it. There was a bending machine right next to it. Then it would go into another room. There was a door between them, double doors. It would go to the next room. That was where powder coating was. They'd powder coat it, put it in the oven with Mini Cooper. They put it in the oven and they'd bake it. Then it would go to the next room with double doors open, and that was silk screening, and they would silk screen it because I could do the artwork and burn the screen in 30 minutes. I mean, we could do shit nobody could do. Nobody could do. Nobody.
So to me, that sounds very efficient to have all that there. So I guess the bigger part of my question was, today you can't really do that because you can't source all the parts. You don't have everything available. But I mean, you're saving money because it's cheaper getting it offshore, but you're stuck in the, like kind of we are now, with being able to get product in. So I'm curious, since you've been through all the phases and you've been through the one where you could do your own stuff, and then now you're kind of tied down. How do you feel?
Here's the drill. The drill is this. For example, let's take a speaker, okay? Because speakers used to be built all over the United States. Holly made the cones. The company that made all the voice coils. There were frames available. You could build it all right here, right? And you still can, I mean, to a point. The problem is now, guess where all the magnets come from? Guess.
China.
Guess where all the top plates come from? Back plates, T-yokes.
China.
Guess where all the spiders come from?
Yeah. No, I understand. So when you lose the ability to, have everything sourced locally, then you have to go where everything is sourced. So.
You can't, I mean, to build a speaker in the United States now, acts of God. I mean, and somebody's got to be crazy enough. It'd have to be Elon Musk that has billions of dollars, who just doesn't care how much it costs to start a factory. Really?
I think, the reason I brought this up, right, and the reason I brought it up, Larry, is so people can hear this, because I hear it so much where people are complaining that car audio companies are using overseas instead of building things here. And I think, your explanation right there was right on. This is not something that happened overnight either. This is something that happened over decades.
30 years.
Right.
30 years.
Right. So we can't turn it around in 1 year and make everything here.
Amplifiers, for example, PC boards. Remember I said Rogue River and Medford? They still make boards. You can get boards made here, no problem. Heat sinks, Kaiser. Kaiser is in Irwindale, California. They have a huge facility there. You can get heat sinks, no sweat. So you can get heat sinks and PC boards. Okay, guess where all the pots come from, the potentiometers? Japan, Alps, right? Or China, right? Transistors, where do all the transistors come from? Well, guess what? Motorola doesn't even make them. They sold the company to ON. Why would Motorola sell a transistor division to another company? Inquiring minds need to know. Well, because they said it was a losing proposition. So they sold it to ON. ON has transistors made in Thailand, in Singapore, in Taiwan, Japan. All the transistors that we need are made overseas. Right now, the chip that everybody needs for full range Class D is called 2092. Well, try to find 2092s. Good luck. Well, they're made in Germany and in Japan. You know that factory that burned to the ground? That was that factory. There was the chip factory that did DSP in Japan, and there's the chip factory that did the 2092s. That's why nobody can get parts to build these amps. So if you're wanting to build a full range Class D amp, the chip of choice, the 350 small block, is 2092. You can use NXP, you can use National. They have a chip, but it ain't even close to the 2092 or the derivative 2093 or the dual, which is a 2051. I mean, guys, there's only so many ways to build this shit. So when somebody thinks there's some mystical, magical thing going on, I'm the guy that will go, no, nothing mystical, magical. And you can't get the parts. So even if we could build the amp here, because I can get heat sinks and I can get PC boards, I can't get the damn parts to stuff the boards. And if I'm going to have Mexican stuff it versus Chinese, what's the difference? In Phoenix Gold, we had at one point we had 360 employees.
Wow.
360, right? We were doing $37 million, which is good. Guess how many of those 300 of them are where were they from? Russia. I had 300 Russians working in our facility because there was a couple of Russian churches up in Portland, and a couple of the Russians came to work for us in the beginning, and then they would go, "Hey, we need help." They'd go to their church and say, "Hey, does anybody want to work?" And they would go, "Sure," And oh, by the way, I'm your lead and I speak Russian. Okay, it was so all of a sudden we had a running joke at the factory. I said, if you saw any girl with a red spot here, run. That's the 10-foot pole. You know what I mean?
There was a lot of vodka going around.
I was waiting for the come work with us. I'm Russian, but I can't do the accent very well.
And I made it a rule we couldn't hire good-looking women because I had 2 good-looking women working at the company. It was a disaster, because all the guys were hitting up because it was incestuous. It was like, oh my God. We had a great-looking receptionist and we had a really good-looking girl working in the art department. And I was like, we got to fire them, guys. Why? Because they're good-looking. And they're like, you can't fire them because they're good-looking. You go, yeah, I can. They're not old. I'm not saying they're old. They're good-looking. They got gold. You know what I mean? They go, that's crazy. I'm like, okay, I'm just telling you. I like looking at good-looking women too. I have no problem. I'm just telling you that all these other guys are in all the youngsters, the peebs are just like.
It's hard to keep them focused when they're.
It is just horrible. So yeah, we went through all that stuff, but I can tell you the parts issue is a big issue.
And you're echoing what we've heard, from several other manufacturers. Everybody knows this, but I think the consumer still is asking the questions, even though we keep talking about it. So every time we get an opportunity to bring it up, I try to bring it up so people can understand.
Yesterday, China told the region of Canton, which is kind of like Texas, okay, except bigger. So there's a province called Canton, right? Canton is where most of the electronics is made. Guess what? They're going on a 3-day work week.
Oh, wow.
Your factory can only work 3 days a week because there's not enough electricity, because they're shutting down some of the coal plants because of the environment, the climate control. And China, in their defense, is getting really medieval about chemicals and pollution, stuff like that. But they don't care if you go out of business. They don't give a shit. Are you kidding? When people had COVID, they were welding the door shut on the apartments. Yeah, seriously. I've got tons of videos of that stuff. So I'm telling you, it's not. And so, we're trying to move shit to Vietnam or Thailand, but the problem, they don't have the infrastructure. They don't have what China's got. And China has the biggest deposits of minerals. So things like silica. Silica is what all transistors are based on. Well, guess where the biggest silica is? China. Hello. Yeah. So if you want to make transistors, you got to go to China. Now you can get silica other places, obviously, but they have by far the largest load of it. So it's like, wow. You're just handcuffed and tied up.
Yeah, but it goes to show, what can happen over a time period when companies move products overseas to save money, and for whatever reason, it gets to the point where, hey, what can we do now? Because you're so dependent on them, then you can't do your own thing because you can't make the products here. They're only made over there. It's just a very complicated situation, but I don't know if it's a lesson learned or if it's just we just have to suck it up and wait for things to be available. Because what do you do?
It just broke ground in Ocotillo, which is south of Phoenix. It's near Chandler. I know you guys don't know what that is, but it's in the southern part of Phoenix is a city called Chandler. Below that is Ocotillo. That's where one of the biggest fab 40, 20, 32. And there was a huge fab there. It looks like a flying saucer you can see it for 10 miles. It's huge. They're building a bigger one right now. They're putting $20 billion into building a giant chip factory. And this chip factory is to build all the chips for other companies like the DSP and things like that. So they're going to come to our rescue. But the problem is it takes 2 years to get
2 years.
running.
I was going to say, yeah, it's not a
It takes
quick
2 years
turnaround.
to get up and running. So it ain't going to happen instantly. So
Right.
we're screwed and tattooed till 23.
Well, at least we have a plan. So, I mean, at least it's, it's a working toward a
That's why I'm
goal.
only grow so big, because I can't get enough product to go crazy. I mean,
Right.
hell yeah. If I could sell everything I could sell, hell yeah. You think? I'd
Keep
sell
it
everything I
coming.
could sell. But the problem is I can't. So it's crazy to just keep putting dealers on when you can't ship. I can ship, but you know what I mean? At some point, if people really start liking it, it'll be like, ooh, whoops.
Well, and you have let me share this here because this is interesting, even though it is a motorcycle amp, but it's a 4-channel amp, 4 inches by 9 inches with a DSP built in for $550. That's
and 4 times 100 and the 4 ohms and 4 times 150 and the 2 ohms, and has 6 channels of DSP. So 4 channels drive the internal.
So you can do your subs as well then, the external.
Yep. Two is a preamp out, so you can go to a monoblock or another stereo amp or whatever you want to do.
That is a deal and a half. That is a deal and a half. That is a deal.
And the software is available. So if you scroll down on that page, a little farther, right there. There's QR code. So if you have your phone, you just put it up there and whammo zammo, you download the app and hallelujah. And then if you go into support, there's a thing called tutorials and videos. And in there, I have a video that says how you initial setup. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah, it walks you through.
Yep, and it walks you through. And then there's one on how to set crossovers. I have another one. I'm going to do another one on EQing, and then I'm going to do a white paper on crossovers, like 6 dB slopes, 12 dB slopes, 18, 24, 36 hike. Like, hey, Bessel Networks, Butterworth, Linkwitz Riley. Woo, which one's better? I'm like, really, guys? You don't even know what an octave is, but you want to know what a Bessel is. Seriously. And it's a power thing. So I want to teach everybody, like, hey, this is how things work. And once you grasp that concept, then you're like, ooh, now I get it. That makes total sense.
They're all going to be like me and skip to page 12.
Yep. But I think everybody should read it, because there's a lot of important things where there's no quarter gain, no half gain, no 3/4. That doesn't exist. Do not tell me shit like I only have a quarter gain, because there's going to be a flying through the phone. Like, there's no quarter gain. There's no half. You know what I mean? Don't tell me shit like that. Tell me voltage, right? Derek, if we really want to know, tell me voltage. Then we have a conversation. Don't tell me it don't hit, man. It don't slam. It don't bump. Really? How hard do it hit? Not hard enough. I don't have a not hard enough meter. What does that mean? Well, it should hit harder. And I'm like, mine should be longer, but it ain't. You know what I'm saying? So I'm just telling you that, if you're going to talk that kind of talk, we need to talk numbers. We need to be talking voltage. Do not talk watts, talk voltage. Tell me I'm swinging 33 volts into 1 ohm. Oh, cool. It's 1,000 watts. Great. I got it. You know what I mean? But if you talk, a guy told me the other day he's putting 700 watts into these. I'm like, how do you know that? Well, I measure with a voltmeter. For a billionth of a second? Cool. Yeah, we'll do it for a billionth of a second. No problem. Under music conditions, it's different than sine wave.
Yeah, he's not getting the power factor calculated into that either, so he's not really getting truly.
It's just I go, guys, sine wave. We use sine wave with load resistors, and I go, this doesn't exist in real world. I don't know about you, but sine wave ain't my favorite music. Well, Lil Wayne injects sine wave into his music, by the way. I don't get that, but okay.
See?
But nobody else does, because that's weird. right? And load resistors aren't my favorite speaker. They sound like shit, actually. So hang on, we're testing things with load resistors and sine wave that never happens in real world. What kind of what I mean, it's a test and it's important, but why don't you go test it in the vehicle for real with the speaker you got hooked up? Just go out there with a voltmeter and measure the AC volts out, crank it up, playing whatever bullshit bass music you have. I'm guessing you have some. Crank it up and read whatever it is, and then volt squared divided by the impedance is power. Hey, this thing's making so many watts. Cool, good. Now we have a conversation we can talk with. If we have that conversation, we know what's going on, because now I teach in my seminars. I go, guys, when you're doing a car with a subwoofer in it, measure it before it rolls out of there. Just do the simple voltmeter test. Write it on the receipt. Hey, we performance tested your amplifier. It's rated at 1,000 watts. It does 636. Oh, and that equals 1,392 watts. If I was a customer, I'd be like, damn, you guys measured my car? Damn straight, because we're professionals. That's what we do. Wow, you guys rock. Well, the real reason we did it is not for him. Screw him. I did it so if he comes back 2 months later and goes, it just doesn't hit like it used to. Well, how hard do it hit? Not hard enough. So you go out with your voltmeter and read it again. Did somebody turn knobs? Oh, I blew up something. Oh, yeah, but my buddy saw the system and he said you only gave me half power. Your buddy has a scope? Cool, really?
Awesome. All knobs to the right.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, so it was good talking to you guys.
Yes.
Longer than we can stay awake, trust me.
Well, we do appreciate you taking the time out to join us tonight and going over the old stories, plus showing us some of your new products at Cicada. Have people check it out. We'll leave a link in the video description. They can check your site out. They've got plenty of reading material there. They can check out your products. And it's
tech sheets. There's all kinds of stuff.
All kind of goodies.
I can keep you busy. There's no doubt.
Well, it was a great time.
So if I need to draw or I need to show, I can show. All my seminars are always whiteboard. I hate doing seminars with slideshow, but PowerPoint. I hate that. I don't like doing PowerPoint.
I like to be able to modify as you go, and it's easier to build things and show it on a whiteboard.
Yep, I like it that way. It's easier. Okay, guys.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Larry. We will leave the links in the description below to your site. And thank you again for spending time with us going over some of the old stuff in car audio. I'm sure there's a whole lot of other stories maybe we can get to a different day. And we'd love to have you back sometime if you'll be back with us.
Okay, no problem.
All right. Well, thanks a lot. Okay. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Y'all have a great night.
You too.
All right. Bye-bye.